page 1253, which is the beginning of chapter 2 of the book of Esther. Okay. Now, yesterday we had the introduction of Achashverosh and the party that he threw and the conflict with the queen, and she was deposed, according to the oral tradition, killed, and so forth and so on. I didn't mention it, but I want to mention it now. The very first verse in the book is, and it came to pass in the days of Achashverosh. Now, if you skip ahead to the end of the book, on page 1261, chapter 10, which is of all of three verses long. King Achashverosh had levied taxes on both the mainland and the islands. All his mighty and powerful acts and a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, the king had promoted or recorded in the book of Chronicles, the kings of Media and Persia. So it looks like the book is a book about Achashverosh. Looks like sequence of events in Achashverosh's life. That's the way the book, I would say, in a literary sense, presents itself. And that's going to be important when we come to the end of it. Obviously, we only care about Achashverosh because of his impact on the Jewish people and how Mordecai and Esther reacted to him, and the conflict with Haman, and the origin of the party of the holiday of Purim. But the book reads as if it's a partial biography of Achashverosh. That we'll have to understand why the book presents itself that way. So chapter 2, since the queen has been deposed and in fact killed, and he feels that he wants a new queen, and as is typical for him, he doesn't say, let's get a queen. He just mentions to his advisors that, I am queenless. And they say, oh, well, here's a procedure that would be reasonable. Send messengers out to all of the 127 provinces, let them search for beautiful girls, and you should examine them one by one and pick one who pleases you as your new queen. And as we mentioned yesterday, this is in absolute contrast to Vashti, who was his queen, because she had her own independent standing, being Nebuchadnezzar's granddaughter, and I'm sure she credited herself with intelligence, and so on and so on. And when Achashverosh sent to have her brought to him to show off her beauty, she took that as a gross insult, as indeed it was. And it was meant to be, because there was like a power struggle going on, and if he could do this to her, and she would give in to it, that would mean she is submitting to him, and she doesn't submit to anybody. So here, the advisor said to the king, what you want is a girl who'll be just like you wanted Vashti to be. Beautiful, and that's all. And, you can show off her beauty and prove how, what wonderful things you have. So he's looking for a beautiful girl. Now, at this point, the Megillah introduces the first Jewish element. There was a Jewish man in Shushan, the capital. There was Mordecai, son of Yair, son of Shimi, son of Kish, from the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, that's nice. Is that going to play a role in the story? Is it going to have anything to do with the events in the story? It will, and that's something which is like laying a groundwork for later events. Now, how did he get there? Who had been exiled from Jerusalem, along with the exiles who went exile with king of Yehuda, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had exiled. And he reared, that means to bring up as a child, Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. So how are they related? Mordecai and Esther, they're cousins, first cousins. Since she had neither father nor mother. So he's, even though it's cousins, he's older, and she has no parents to take care of her, and he took her in and raised her. And notice that it says Hadassah, that is Esther. It is common in the Tanakh that people have more than one name. And the oral tradition usually tries to comment that one is the name the person was given, and the other is a description of a quality. And sometimes you have a disagreement which one was the name, the proper name, and which one was a description of the quality. And the contrast is not as great as it might sound, because even the proper name of a person is usually a description of a quality in Hebrew. Not in other languages. I don't think George in English describes a quality. Last names sometimes do. Miller had a mill. Fisher, Farmer can be a last name. So, but in Hebrew, Reuven and Shimon and Levi and Yehuda and they all have names. They all have meaning. So you say this is the name and this is a descriptive term. Yeah, but the name is also descriptive. So it means it's shades of centrality in the description. And here the text introduces it. And it could be that she was typically known under the name Esther. People wouldn't know her name Hadassah. I don't know how popular the name Hadassah, how well she was known by that name, because throughout the book she's called Esther. At any rate, it introduces her with two names. Yeah.
I had always heard that Esther, or that Mordecai was Esther's uncle, but he's.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's just not. It's just. But it says here that they're cousins, or is it like an alternate?
His uncle's daughter.
Yeah.
So I don't know. No, I don't. Maybe I heard it once, but maybe it's just a mistake. The people they see uncle, and they don't calculate correctly. The Hebrew was Bas Dodo, the daughter of his uncle. And she, the girl, was finely featured and beautiful. And when her father and mother had died, Mordecai adopted her as his daughter. Now, you read adopted in English and you think of all the legal procedure, fill out forms, and the state has to stamp it and so forth and so on. It doesn't mean that at all. And indeed, if we know that he raised her, then saying that he took her, he treated her like a daughter, should be taken for granted. I mean, it's not obvious what this means to convey. And therefore, there is a position, and the Hebrew is Lekacha Mordecai lo lebas. He took her as a daughter. Now, we have in our tradition that sometimes the wife is called the house, as if she's the one who makes a home for the husband. And the word for house is bayis, beis, yud, suf. And bas is beis, suf, without the yud in the middle. And the yud is a weak word, a weak letter. So and lakach in Hebrew is how you contract a marriage, how you construct a marriage. So the oral tradition, some say that she in fact was married to him. A marriage between first cousins in Jewish law is perfectly permissible. So it means the story has to be read two ways. If she's his, the one whom he raised and treats her in a fatherly fashion is one thing, and if they're married is something else. And as events take place, we have to check, how the events will fit with each of those explanations. So it came to pass, when the king's bidding and decree were published, looking for the girl that will be the queen, and when many young girls were brought together to Shushan, the capital, in other words, you had the spies or the messengers out everywhere, and I'm sure that many girls volunteered for this. It's a chance to be the queen of the realm. You have 127 provinces, you have the emperor, and you could be the queen. That's not a bad position in life. And they were all brought to the capital under the charge of Haggai. Esther was taken into the palace under the charge of Haggai, the guardian of the women, because she was a beautiful woman. So, she's taken. Now, the commentators point out here, all the verbs that apply to what happens to Esther are passive verbs. She was taken, and she was brought, and she was told, and she was clothed, and it all happened to her. She didn't initiate anything. She just let it happen. So this is Haggai now, who's in charge of these women whom the king is going to investigate. The girl pleased him, Haggai. She obtained his kindness. In other words, she was charming. Not that she tried to be charming, but she was charming. I don't know if you've ever seen young children, let's say 5 years old or 8 years old. A child can be charming. The child doesn't know anything about social attraction and consequences and so on and so on. The child just behaves in a charming way. So this pleased him, and she obtained his kindness. He hurriedly prepared her cosmetics and her allowance of the delicacies to present her, along with the 7 special maids from the palace, and he transferred her maidens to the best quarters in the harem. So this, as you'll see, was a year-long process. The girls prepared for a year for that one presentation to the king, which will then determine their fate, to be queen or not to be queen. If they weren't chosen as queen, they became part of the king's official harem, and I'm sure that he kept the girls in the harem treated well, and that was their life. Their life was to be a woman in the harem of the king, which in those times, was secure, and you got enough money, and, they were treated well. That's why there wasn't a real downside to doing this. So he gave her the best. Now, they had certain cosmetics that they used in order to improve their appearance, and delicacies, and each of these girls got 7 maids from the palace, and there were different quarters in which they were placed. He put her into the best place. Esther had not told of her people or her kindred. Esther is a mystery, for Mordecai had instructed her not to tell. The spies are everywhere. They see a beautiful girl on the street. Come with us. The king wants to talk to you. He told her, don't identify yourself. Not exactly obvious why he told her that. After all, there's going to be a period of time. She's going to be prepared for a year until the time will come to be presented to the king. I think we can take for granted that she didn't want to be chosen as queen of Persia. And Mordecai didn't want her to be chosen as queen of Persia. So probably Mordecai felt that if she will identify herself, then that will give her a greater chance of being chosen. And therefore he told her, don't identify yourself, to try to raise the probability that she'll be dismissed. The commentators here are split in a certain way. Let's see. What would be found out if she were identified? Well, first of all, we found out that she's Jewish. Now, how would that weigh in the king's decision whether to take her as queen or not? Well, the Jews are in a very vulnerable, weak position. He's the king of 127 provinces. What is a province? Well, it's a country or a city-state, some political entity over which he has control. So they have a local government, and King Ahasuerus is above that local government. But local government functions to run the lives of the people, and he sets higher policy on them. The Jews have no province. The Jews have no local government. They were conquered and exiled by Nebuchadnezzar. Yes, we have our Sanhedrin, we have our religious leadership, but that's not the same as having a court system and a police force and economic policy and so on and so on. We were scattered. We were scattered throughout the kingdom in the different provinces. So a Jew is a low-status person. Now, given what we've seen so far, that could cut two ways. Maybe marrying a Jew would be a disgrace. And then, tell him you're Jewish. That way he'll want to consider you to be queen. On the other hand, given the background, psychological background we've been talking about, maybe marrying a woman with no status is good. That's exactly what he wants. A woman who has no status of her own. She's a Jew, people would just look down on her. He doesn't care that they should look up to her. He cares to show her off. Just like he wanted to show off Vashti's beauty because she's my plaything. That's what he wants from a queen, someone he can show off and have no competition. So then, meaning that she's Jewish, finding out that she's Jewish might be an attractive feature, which would make it more likely she'll be chosen. Then, that's one thing that to be taken into account. The other thing to be taken into account is that her lineage is related to King Saul. She is related to King Saul. And here, some of the commentators say that Mordecai didn't want her identity to be revealed because that might be an attractive feature. Namely, he's a king, he's looking for someone worthy of being queen, and maybe because she has a certain status, he will want to have her as queen and therefore keep it a secret. But given the background that we have been discussing, if that was Mordecai's intention, then it was a mistake. Because he's not looking for a woman with equal queenly status. He doesn't want that competition that he had for Vashti again, which is perfectly possible that Mordecai made a mistake. Had Ahasuerus known that she does come from royal lineage, that would have sealed it, and he would have rejected her, which is an example of something which does happen. Certainly happens to Rishoyim. Sometimes it even happens to the deacon. A tzaddik figures out what the situation is, what needs to be done. He figures out a strategy, and he's got it wrong. And that strategy, in fact, would work against him. And because Baruch Hu arranges it that he doesn't lose by the strategy that he used. In fact, she's going to be chosen as queen. And but being chosen as queen is very good, not very bad. And that he couldn't know. Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused. Earlier you said there's no downside to her being added to the harem and laying...
Women in general, not her, not Esther. Not Esther. A woman in general, what life is she looking forward to? And especially after the edict of the king, men are in charge in the house. Women do what your husbands tell you. Okay, so...
Right. I'm saying, you're saying that the positives are like the security and the luxury, right?
As opposed to the life of a non-Jewish woman in the empire of Ahasuerus.
Okay, right. So I'm just a little, maybe it's like a little vocabulary error here, but wouldn't being in a harem mean that they're taking turns sleeping with the king? Like that's not nothing. That's not like per se positive or negative. I don't know what to think. If you're Esther, that's bad.
Right.
Okay.
That's why I said I'm comparing now the life of a non-Jewish woman in the provinces of the kingdom versus the life of that non-Jewish woman in the harem of the king.
Okay, got it.
And I think that a lot of women will say, for the security and luxury that it gives me, it's worth it. Yeah.
But wouldn't it be better for her to be queen than to be in the harem? I'm saying,
Wouldn't it be better for her to be queen? I mean, once she's already in the candidates.
She's already going to be put in, like, if she's a candidate, then she's going either to the harem or she's going to be queen.
Yeah.
I feel like queen would be better than the harem.
Well, let's figure that out. Let's see what kind of life she would have. If she's queen, that means she's connected to him and interacting with him continuously. If the harem has in it, let's say, 200 women, it really has more, but let's say 200 women, your interactions with him are going to be very rare. The rest of the time, you're free. And the oral tradition has a very, how should I say, almost brutal description of her life, even when she was queen, that she would be with Achashverosh, and then she would go to mikveh, and then she would be with Mordecai, because according to that, one that she's married, right? She goes to Achashverosh because the gun is at her head. It's that or die. You can't disobey the king. Okay, so she has permission to do that, but she's going back and forth all the time. That's not happy. If you're in the harem and you're called twice a year, and the rest of the time you're really living with your husband.
So we're not saying that they're like in this harem.
So how did she manage it, and how was it done? You pay off the right guy. I mean, there are ways to arrange these things. The point is, you're not under his thumb all the time. I think being queen is not knowing that she's going to be instrumental in saving the existence of the Jewish people. Being queen is a terrible tragedy, and the tragedy becomes even worse because she bears him a son, and he never performs like a Jew. I never understood, I still don't understand to this day, why on Purim people dress up their daughters as Queen Esther. Would you really want your daughter to have a life like Queen Esther? I don't think so. Anybody would say, I'll give your daughter a blessing. She should be taken into the harem of a king, and she should become the queen, and she should bear a child who isn't going to be Jewish and so on, and function as a Jew. That would be a curse. No one would want that as a blessing. Well, she was a great tzaddikus, and she was a prophet. So maybe that's, but still, thinking of what she lived. And I had a question, I still have it. I mean, when the Megillah is over, wow, the Jews are saved, and Mordecai is prime minister, and everything's wonderful. Well, it isn't wonderful because Esther is still a queen married to that shlub, that Achashverosh. That's not fun. But she just stays that way. I've asked many people, what are we supposed to learn from that? Yeah.
So two more clarifying questions now that you said what you said. But the first being, isn't Esther, if she is married to Mordecai, isn't she mandated to die before being an adulterer? Shouldn't she choose the gun to her head?
So the answer is that according to the answer that is given, there is a position, not everybody holds the position, but there is a position that if a person is totally passive in this interaction, then they don't have to die. They don't have to die rather than transgress. So only when it's active. So she, and that's what I was saying before, all the verbs are passive verbs. This happened to her, that happened to her. She was brought here, she was, she didn't initiate anything. So that's the answer Toshus and others give, that she didn't have to die.
Okay, my second clarification, you just said, why would anyone dress up as Esther? Which reminded me when I asked you, why would anyone name their daughter Dina? So why would you name your daughter Esther? Because Purim's one day a year. You can dress your daughter up as Esther, and she isn't for the rest of the days. But if she's named Esther, she's Esther forever. So how is it?
Oh, I see. That's okay. I hear the question, right. Dressing him up is one thing, but giving a name Esther is...
a lot more permanent.
Right. So the answer is that... I talk about this to a certain extent in my book, the new book that's coming out of Yis Hashem. You have to distinguish between the external circumstances, on the one hand, and how the subject experiences those external circumstances. I'll just give you a very dramatic example that I just heard about. I have a friend, I didn't know this until he told me a couple of weeks ago. He has a granddaughter who has no use of her limbs. She's, I think, 16 now. The only thing she can control is her eyes. And she has a computer, and the cursor picks up on her eye motions, and she gives lectures, and she has a designing business which is very successful, and she is full of gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he gave her a mind, and he gave her the opportunity to learn Torah and understand Torah, and to inspire others, and to explain to others, and to teach them, and to run a successful business. And when she communicates as a happy person. So when you look at the circumstances, you can't judge the meaning of the circumstances for the person who's experiencing them, because their inner strength may turn that into something which is very positive. So we look at these as opportunities for spiritual expression and spiritual growth. And any circumstance in life, even a circumstance in which there are, let me introduce you to a piece of vocabulary which I learned from my first wife, who learned it from a psychologist, a person who got a PhD in psychology, who happens to be a chassid, and who opened up the schools for children with emotional problems here in Yerushalayim. The difference between a disability and a handicap. Disability versus handicap. A disability is an objective feature. It's something you can't do. For example, one of my disabilities is I can't speak Chinese. I just can't. I can't do wind sailing. I once tried it and I fell off after 20 seconds each time. I could not sustain it. Right? There's certain things that I can't do. But a disability only becomes a handicap if you want and need to do that, and you don't have it. That's a handicap because you can't do the things that you want to do or need to do because of that disability. My disability to speak Chinese is not a handicap because I am in no circumstances when I ever need to speak Chinese. So now, when a person has a physical condition which has various limitations, those limitations are disabilities. This girl can't dance. She can't run. Is that a handicap? Well, it depends about what she wants to accomplish. I don't know what she wants to do. She has crafted a life where these disabilities are not nearly the handicaps that you would expect. I can't say that they're not handicaps at all, but they're not nearly the handicaps that you would expect. Similar attitude is the Jewish neuropsychologist, Oliver Sacks. He was a wonderful, wonderful person. British Jew who not only was he a neurophysiologist, but he also studied philosophy and other things. And he, first of all, tried to get into the lives of people with serious neurophysiological defects. And he noticed how they dealt with them. What he wanted to know, among other things, was how do they deal with the fact that they have this loss? And the courage and ingenuity that they showed. I'll just tell you one little story to give you an idea of what's going on. There was a painter who had some kind of neurological accident, and the result was he lost his color vision. Lost his color vision. I mean, he's a painter who made exhibitions. He was a real painter. So for months he went through like kind of depression, and he would only go out at twilight where the colors aren't brilliant, because if he went out in the daytime and knew what the colors should be and experienced that he didn't have the color vision, it was very depressing for him. Little by little, going around twilight, he began to notice things in the white, black, and gray world that he now lived in. He noticed visual features of that world that he had never noticed before. And then he started to paint in white, black, and gray. And he became very good at it. And some years later, when an operation was developed to restore color vision to someone who had his condition, he refused to have it. He didn't want to go back to color because color overwhelms your vision and you can't see the subtleties of the black, white, and gray, and he entered into a new world. So he has an objective disability. He can't see colors. Is it a handicap? Not given what he wants to do now. On the contrary, he prefers not to correct that disability. So Esther, I have a son-in-law who explained this to me when I asked several people many years ago. Her name is Esther. The Gemara traces that to the verse in Dvarim which talks about God hiding his face. Hastir means to hide. Her challenge, her place in life was to deal with hiddenness. That was her place in life. And the fact that she had it and continued it until she died, she understood that that's where my niche is in perfecting God's world. We spoke about this once. Everybody has a niche, and you can't tell if they're suffering, whether they're suffering because of transgressions, or whether that's just a niche that they were given. I happen to be learning the Maharal now in the morning, or Chadash, with a friend of mine who's an exposition of Purim. And he said that some people think the book of Esther, the miracles that it describes are not open miracles, like the crossing of the sea, or the revelation at Sinai, or the miracle of the oil of Hanukkah, burning miraculously for 8 times as much time as it would have burned. And therefore they think that the miracles of Purim are downgraded because they're not open, visible miracles. He said the opposite is true. That which comes into our world with a hidden nature is because it comes from so high a source that if its source were revealed, it would be too destructive. We wouldn't be able to interact with it. The more hidden it is, the higher the source it comes from. I had seen this years ago in Balatanya, but I didn't know where it was coming from, and I didn't have any context for it. So he says the fact that the miracles of the book of Esther are seemingly natural events shows that they come from a very high source. They're not downgraded at all. It shows the spectacular nature of the miracles. I haven't finished it. I just finished the Haggadah this morning. We're going into the rest of the Sefer. So I may have more to say about it. But that's the idea that a person's fate, the value of a person's fate or the character of the fate depends very much on what they do with it, what they're able to do with it. We actually spoke about this a few weeks ago when I talked about framing. Psychologists, cognitive behavioral psychologists who talk about framing a situation. They have full glass, they have empty glass, right? If one says half full, one says half empty, what's the truth?
They're both right?
They're both right. They have to be. Because if it's half full, it's half empty, right? If it's half empty, it's half full.
Twice as big as it needs to be.
So now the question is this. Since it is both, you have a choice to see it as half full or half empty. That's your choice. Neither way are you missing the reality. If you choose to see it half full, you'll have a much different life than if you choose to see it half empty. So this is the framing problem. When you have a situation, not only are you confronted with the external objective reality, but there's the subjective frame that you put around it, which determines your interpretation of it and your reaction to it. And this, again, will make the difference between a disability and handicap. Disability is objective. There's nothing you can do about that. But framed one way, it becomes a handicap, and framed another way, it doesn't become a handicap. So, and it's up to you to a certain extent to choose the frame that you want. So when you say that a certain person's situation is a tragedy, you have to be very careful to describe what you mean. In objective terms, the person can suffer a loss, but it doesn't imply that the person is going to be devastated by it and disrupted by it in the things that they think are important, which is their spiritual growth. Okay, it's a little bit deeper than. Okay, fine. So now, back to the text for a little bit. 1254. Now, when each girl's turn arrived to come to the king Achashverosh, after having been treated according to the manner prescribed for women for 12 months, for so was the prescribed length of their anointing accomplished, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and feminine cosmetics. After that whole year of beautifying, thus the girl came to the king. Here it says the girl came to the king. Not that she was brought to the king, but she came to the king. Esther's not going to say that. She was given whatever she requested to accompany her from the harem to the palace. Any gems or any clothing or a hairdo or whatever she wants. After all, it's her opportunity to present herself and perhaps become queen. And it was left up to her to decide what will be best for her. In the evening she would come, and the next morning she would return to the second harem in the custody of Shazgaz, the king's chamberlain and guardian of the concubines. She would never again go to the king unless the king desired her, and she was summoned by name. She now became part of the harem, the official harem. That was the procedure. So, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Avichail, uncle of Mordecai, would adopt her. Oh, maybe here's where it comes from. Yeah, the uncle of Mordecai, right? Would adopt her as his own daughter, come to the king. Now, why is that all brought here? Especially, again, this is her lineage. Okay, often in the Tanakh we report the lineage because that's part of the explanation for what happens to them. Was this business? He took her to him as a daughter. That was the second phrase. First it said he raised her, and he took her to the daughter. So if you understand that it means that he was really married to her, okay, here's the bottom line, right? She's married to Mordecai, and she's being taken into Achashverosh to come to the king. She requested nothing beyond what Haggai, the king's chamberlain guarding the women, had advised. He said, take this, use this, use this. She just goes along with what he says. Esther would captivate all who saw her. The people looked at her and they were like captivated. Esther was taken. The contrast is right there in the text. In the previous ones it says she went and she came. She didn't come, she didn't go, she was taken to the king, to his palace in the 10th month, which was on the Teves, 7th year of his reign. Okay, so now let's just do a little calculation. The party was in the 3rd year of his reign. That's when Vashti was kicked out. How much time expired between her being kicked out and search for a new queen? Let's say 6 months. Okay? We're now in the 7th year. So something like 4 years has gone by. 4 years. That's a lot of girls, right? More than 1,000 girls, like 1,200 girls. Has a big harem. Let's say it's 900 girls. Still big. Okay, but remember, he's very rich. So, it's not a problem. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won more of his grace and favor than all the other girls. So that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. So some of the commentators wonder here. It says, more than all the other women, and one is grace and favor than all the other girls. So there are women and girls, and there are two different groups. So it seems like girls here is Nara, which means, it usually refers to the teenage years. And women could be of any age. He sent out to find young girls. There was the word Nara. And now, apparently, they said, but there's some 30 and 40-year-olds who also look good. And he expanded his search. And he, having done it 900 times, he had a lot of experience. The more time goes by, the harder it is because those girls are still there. He could change his mind and take one of them back as queen. No, she outclassed all of them, and he pronounced her queen. Then the king made a great banquet for all of his officers and all his servants. It was Esther's banquet. Who made it? The king made it. She didn't make her own banquet like Vashti did, taking over part of the palace to make her own thing. No, the king is running the show. What he does is what gets done, and me, I'm just, going along for the ride. So, for all his officers and servants, it was Esther's banquet, and he proclaimed an amnesty for the provinces. There were debts that the provinces owed the king, and he forgave those debts. And he gave gifts worthy of the king, distributed gifts in various places. So you think, well, yeah, I suppose, he found the queen, and he wants this to be a public event, and so forth and so on. Some commentators see here another element, which, if you put it in here, it'll explain something we'll see a couple of chapters down the road. The king wanted to know who she was. The king wanted to know who she was. And she didn't answer. Mordecai told her not to answer. So she didn't answer. Well, what's he going to do? He's captivated by her, charmed by her. He wants her to be queen. He's not going to throw her away. But he doesn't know who she is. Now, she becomes queen. Well, that's public knowledge. That's something which, nobody comes forward and says, hey, Esther, we went to day camp together. She lived in, in Jonestown. Nothing. So his idea here was to publicize the event and get people talking about it. Wow, did you hear the king reduced the taxes? And did you hear he gave gifts over there? And everybody should be talking about it so that somewhere, somehow, the information should come out. This was an attempt on his part to get the information. And as you'll see, shortly he'll try to make an attempt by threatening Esther. And later on in Megillah, at a certain point, she will say to the king, I have certain things in mind, and tomorrow I will do according to the king's bidding. And the king has not told her to do anything in 6 chapters. And the commentators take it back to here. He wants to know who she is. Well, she says, tomorrow I'll tell you who I am. And this is, in fact, what happens, 6 chapters from now. But right here, all you get is that she's not telling, because he says, by the way, I just want to make a comparison here. Some of you know about what happens if someone leaves a city and he's killed on the way, and they find his corpse. So that's the procedure of the Egla Rufa. The cities nearby measure the distance from the person to the city, and then the city that's closest has to bring this animal and do various things for this animal. And the Torah says if they do that, then that will help atone for their possible responsibility that they have for not taking care of this person, and so forth and so on. What's the point of this whole procedure? So there are many points, and from many different dimensions. The Rambam in the guide says this is a very elaborate procedure, and it very rarely happens. And people are going to be there, and they're going to watch it and comment on it, and everybody's going to be talking about it. And that might reveal who the murderer is, and that's the real atonement. The real atonement is to punish the murderer. So this is a way of getting people to talk about it, so maybe the real murderer will turn up. So then you have, according to the Rambam, that idea over there, and you have this idea over here. These commentators say, king was making a fuss. So that people will talk, maybe, somewhere, somehow, information about Esther's identity will come out, and of course it didn't. Yeah.
I always assumed that the guards went to her. She didn't just show up at this place of their harem, and if they did, then shouldn't they be able to tell King Ahasuerus, like, we got her from this spot, from this place?
She could be in the market.
Oh, you're saying she might have been out.
She might not have been home.
So she would have been in a town where she was...
Oh, she was from Shushan. We know that.
Oh, okay.
She was in Shushan, but who knows who her parents are and who, there are a lot, and it's a capital city of an empire, so there are a lot of people there, a lot of different kinds of people there. I'm sure there were subgroups, subcultures, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
What's that city now?
I'm sorry?
What's that city? What's it called?
There is a Shushan. It's in Iraq.
It's still called that, or it's a different city now?
I don't know what they call it. I don't know. I don't know what the official title is, but they know which one it is. They know there is apparently there a grave which is supposed to be the grave of Mordecai. So, yeah. So now, it says, the banquet, right? 19 on page 1254. And when the maidens were gathered together the second time, and Mordecai sat at the king's gate, Esther still told nothing of her kindred or people, as Mordecai had instructed her. For Esther continued to obey Mordecai just as when she was raised by him. And this is a very strange pair of sentences. The maidens were gathered at setting the second time. They were. This is the only place where it's mentioned. Is this public knowledge in the mind of the reader? Maybe. So now, and Mordecai sitting in the king's gate, and still, now is it when? Let me just check. No, there's no still in the Hebrew. Esther did not tell of her kindred. So what's the connection here? There's more maidens in the city, and Mordecai's there, and she didn't tell her identity. Like, it's just like a laundry list. No. The king gathered the maidens into the city to frighten Esther. I want to know who you are. And you're not telling me who you are? Well, this is how we got the king, how you became queen, right? By gathering the maidens into the city? We're doing it again. Because I'm going to get rid of you. I'm going to replace you. That's the fear that he wanted to strike in her to get her to do what he wanted her to do. And the text says, and she didn't reveal who she was because she was obeying Mordecai. So that was the purpose of gathering together, to get her to tell. And she's not telling. That's pretty close to the surface. So this becomes now an issue, between the two of them. And he's not going to throw her out because he's charmed by her, but it's an issue. And it's an issue that, he wants resolved. So years later, when the confrontation with Haman takes place, and she says to the king, tomorrow I'll do according to the bidding of the king. I'll do what the king wants. I know what the king wants. Tomorrow, even after years of resisting, tomorrow I'll do it. That's what she's referring to. And he has no clue what that will mean. Okay, very good. So we're now just at the end of chapter 2. We'll pick it up tomorrow in the session.